The road stretched out endlessly before him, a thin ribbon of asphalt cutting through the desolate countryside. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows that danced along the edges of the road. Mark had always been drawn to the mysterious allure of deserted places, and tonight, he found himself on this secluded road chasing the thrill of the unknown. The night air was thick with silence, broken only by the soft hum of Mark's car engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. His headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the road ahead like a tunnel leading to an uncertain destination. With each passing mile, the feeling of isolation grew more profound, and a subtle unease settled in the pit of his stomach. Mark had never been one to shy away from adventure, but tonight, as he navigated the winding road, he couldn't shake the sense that he was not alone. The forest that bordered the road seemed to press in on him, the trees standing like sentinels in the moonlight. He told himself it was just his imagination, that there was nothing to fear in this remote corner of the world. As Mark continued his solitary journey, the isolation became more pronounced. His phone displayed no service, and the GPS had long lost its signal. He was truly on his own, navigating by nothing more than the dim moonlight and the occasional flicker of his headlights. Then, as he rounded a bend, he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Mark's heart skipped a beat as he slammed on the brakes, the screech of tires tearing through the silence of the night. His car came to a shuddering halt, just a few feet from the person who had appeared out of nowhere. It was a woman, her face obscured by the shadows. She wore a tattered white dress that billowed in the wind, and her long, disheveled hair hung like a curtain over her face. Mark's initial shock turned to concern. Was she in trouble? Lost? He rolled down his window and called out to her. "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" The woman didn't respond. She simply stood there, unmoving, her hair concealing her features. Mark's unease intensified, but his instinct to help prevailed. He cautiously stepped out of the car and approached her. As he reached out to touch her shoulder, she suddenly turned, and Mark recoiled in horror. Her face was pale and gaunt, her eyes empty sockets filled with darkness. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth. Before Mark could react, she lunged at him. Emitting a chilling, inhuman shriek, Mark stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. He darted to his car, desperately fumbling for his keys, and slammed the door shut just as the woman's bony fingers grazed at the window. He peeled out of there, tires screeching, and left the horrifying apparition behind. As he sped away from the nightmarish encounter, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was pursuing him. He glanced in his rearview mirror, but there was nothing there. Was it all a hallucination? A trick of the mind brought on by the late hour and the desolation of the road? He couldn't be sure, but his heart still raced with fear. Mark drove for what felt like hours, the road stretching on endlessly, and the forest seemed to close in around him. He had no idea where he was or where he was going. Panic gnawed at the edges of his mind as he contemplated the horrors he had witnessed. Could it have been real?
Just as he thought he couldn't take it anymore, he saw the faint glimmer of lights in the distance. Relief flooded through him as he approached what appeared to be a small, run-down gas station at the edge of the road. Mark pulled into the gravel lot, his car's headlights casting eerie shadows against the decrepit building. He stepped out of the car, his legs unsteady from the adrenaline coursing through his veins. The gas station was eerily quiet, and Mark's footsteps echoed in the silence as he approached the entrance. He pushed the door open, and the rusty bell above jingled, breaking the stillness. Inside, the gas station appeared abandoned. Shelves lined with dusty, expired goods and faded posters advertising long-forgotten products told a story of neglect. Mark called out, but there was no response. He began to wonder if he had stumbled upon another deserted place, an eerie echo of the road he had been traveling. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a flicker of movement behind the counter. Mark cautiously approached, his heart pounding in his chest. And then, to his shock and horror, he saw a figure crouched behind the counter, huddled in the shadows. It was the woman. the same nightmarish, ghastly creature he had encountered on the road. Her empty eye sockets seemed to bore into his soul as she hissed in a guttural, otherworldly tone. Mark stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. It couldn't be real. He must be trapped in a waking nightmare. The creature, now fully revealed in the dim light, looked even more grotesque up close. Its skin was ashen, stretched taut over sharp, skeletal features. Claws protruded from its elongated fingers, and its torn white dress hung from its emaciated frame like a macabre shroud. The air in the gas station turned frigid, and Mark could feel the malevolence emanating from the creature. Desperation gripped him, and he sprinted toward the exit. The door creaked open reluctantly, and Mark burst out into the night. The gas station behind him seemed to echo with the creature's haunting shrieks as he ran to his car. As Mark sped away, he could still hear the creature's anguished cries in the distance. The road stretched on, seemingly endless, and the moonlit shadows played tricks on his weary mind. The terror of the night lingered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched. Exhausted and disoriented, Mark drove until the first light of dawn began to break on the horizon. The desolate road eventually led him to a small town, where he sought refuge at the local police station. He stumbled in, his eyes wild with fear, and recounted the nightmarish events that had unfolded on the secluded road and at the forsaken gas station. The police listened, their expressions ranging from skepticism to concern. They dispatched a patrol to investigate, promising Mark that they would check the gas station and the stretch of road where he had encountered the creature. Doubt gnawed at him. Would they find anything? Or would his ordeal be dismissed as the product of a sleep-deprived mind? As the day wore on, anxiety clawed at Mark's sanity. He couldn't shake the memory of the creature's malevolent eyes and the echo of its otherworldly shrieks. When night fell once again, Mark's apprehension reached new heights. He couldn't bring himself to sleep, haunted by the fear that the creature might find him again. The following morning, as the first rays of sunlight painted the sky, the police returned with a solemn expression. Mark's heart sank as he faced the officers. They informed him that the gas station, just as he had described it, lay abandoned and decrepit. However, there was no sign of the ghastly creature, no trace of the horrors he had witnessed. Confusion and disbelief etched on his face. Mark was left grappling with the uncertainty of what had transpired. Was it all a hallucination, a manifestation of his deepest fears? Or had the creature retreated to the shadows, biding its time until the next unsuspecting traveler ventured onto that secluded road? Haunted by the chilling memories, Mark drove away from the small town, the road stretching out ahead of him like an uncertain path into the unknown. The gas station, the creature, and the horrors of that fateful night lingered in his mind, leaving him to wonder if he had truly escaped or if the nightmare would return to claim him once more. Days turned into weeks, and Mark found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the creature's hollow eyes staring back at him. The secluded road, once a thrilling adventure, now loomed in his thoughts like a haunting specter. The authorities never found any evidence to validate his harrowing tale, and the world continued as if the horrors he had experienced were nothing more than a figment of his imagination.
Yet, late at night, when the moon hung low in the sky, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that the shadows held secrets, and the secluded road was a gateway to a realm of terror. He had a growing certainty. He had merely postponed the inevitable. When would she return for him? This remained a question that echoed in the depths of his troubled mind.